Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. It is a pleasure to be here today in Syracuse and Onondaga County with my colleagues in government, law enforcement, and advocacy. I am proud and always pleased to be joined by Mayor Stephanie Miner, my good friend Senator Dave Valesky, Police Chief Frank Fowler, Deputy Chief Stu Cavuto, Assemblyman Al Sturpey, Assemblyman Sam Roberts. I think we have a representative for Assemblyman Magnarelli with us, and also some terrific advocates. Patrick Stanzik from the Greater Syracuse Land Bank, one of the great success stories, I think, in our state, in my view. Rich Pachowski, the Executive Director of Syracuse United Neighbors, Terry Quaglia, who's the Director of Home Headquarters, and Dwight Hicks, the Secretary of the Greater Syracuse Land Bank. We are also joined by Brian Tobin, the Mayor of Portland, and by my Executive Deputy Attorney General, Marty Mack, the former Mayor of Portland. So it's good to be in family. I appreciate everyone being here today, and I think that the fact that a group this large and this important has showed up for this press conference tells you something about why redevelopment efforts in Syracuse are really models in many cases for the rest of the state of New York. Specifically, we're here today as a part of our ongoing effort to revive, rebuild, and revitalize Syracuse and cities and towns across New York. If there's one accomplishment I'm proud of from my first term of Attorney General, it's my work to hold accountable the big financial firms that caused the crash of our housing market in 2008. And my work to ensure that part of that accountability included helping communities devastated by the crash to recover and grow. When I was first elected Attorney General, we were in the midst of the worst financial crisis in nearly a century. Banks were foreclosing on homes in record numbers, pushing families onto the streets and leaving thousands of properties, like the one we're standing in front of today, vacant or abandoned. I'm proud that my office led the nation in demanding justice from the banks whose reckless misconduct caused the crash of the housing market. And I'm proud of the fact that I was the first AG to hold out for a thorough investigation. The results of the work that the task force I now co-chair has done on this investigation have yielded well over $60 billion in relief nationally for state and local governments and to help homeowners and communities hurt by the crash. We've used a portion of these settlement funds to create the Homeowner Protection Program, or HOP, a statewide network of more than 90 legal services and housing counseling agencies, which have been helping New Yorkers facing foreclosure to stay in their homes and to help people understand programs they were eligible for that might enable them to purchase a new home. In just 2 years, our HOP network has seen over 40,000 New York families, including more than 3,000 in this area alone. And we have partnered with organizations like Home Headquarters, Metro Interfaith, United Neighborhood Housing Services, and Legal Services of Central New York in the HOP effort. But as we work to keep families in their homes, we quickly realized that even if you kept your home during the Great Recession, if you were on a street with 2 or 3 abandoned properties, you were still a victim of the crash. Your whole community was also damaged by the collapse of the housing market. So we went back and got the banks to commit $33 million to fund land banks, nonprofit corporations that buy up vacant properties and either fix them up or tear them down so the land can be put to productive use, including serving as affordable housing. And here in Onondaga County, I would say the Syracuse Land Bank is a great success story. Tribute to the mayor, the senator, all of my colleagues, the assembly members in local government here who have worked together to make this a success. The Greater Syracuse Land Bank has taken $5 million in renovated properties that have already generated, I believe, over $7.6 million in tax revenues, demolished dozens of other properties, and sold more than 100 tax delinquent homes to new owners. This is smart and efficient public policy, but after we started funding land banks, we became aware of another problem, and that's the problem we're here to address today. New York has the longest foreclosure process in the country, and during the long foreclosure process, many properties entered what we call a zombie state. Zombies are properties that homeowners have abandoned where banks have not completed the foreclosure process and therefore not taken title to the property. The bank doesn't own them yet, so nobody maintains them. They fall into disrepair and become havens for crime, decay, vandalism, and arson. Zombies weigh very heavily on our local governments. They shrink the tax base, they decrease the property value of neighboring homes, and they're an enormous burden for code enforcement and emergency service providers. The issue is especially bad here in Onondaga County, which had the third highest percentage in the state of New York of residential foreclosures that were zombie properties last year. The solution to the zombie invasion requires legislation. My daughter loves it when I talk about zombies. But it is a much more serious problem than the one you see on television. Zombie houses are a serious problem, but they're a problem with a solution. So we're proud to stand here today as a group and as reflecting the united will of the public officials and activists here in Syracuse and Onondaga County in support of a bill that will solve this problem. We're here to support the Abandoned Property and Neighborhood Relief Act, a bill which will force banks and other lenders to take responsibility to maintain zombies and help our local governments to regulate them. First, the bill would require banks to provide homeowners with early notice that they are legally entitled to remain in their homes until ordered to leave by a court. The reason we have so many zombies is a lot of homeowners fall behind on their payments and think they have to get out. They abandon the property before there is a court order that requires them to leave. Families don't understand their rights. This legislation will make sure they do. Second, the bill is going to make lenders responsible for maintaining a delinquent property after it's abandoned and not, as under current law, once the long foreclosure process is complete. Right now the banks know they're going to take over the property, there's no one there, there's no one fighting the foreclosure, but we still have this huge time lag that results in the phenomenon of abandoned zombie properties. And then third, the bill is going to create a statewide registry for zombies that will be electronically accessible by and serve as a resource for local governments facing abandoned property issues. Banks that fail to maintain or register abandoned properties will be subject to fines. And I'm proud to announce today that the Abandoned Property Neighborhood Relief Act, which has been introduced with sponsors in both the Senate and the Assembly, has two new provisions that were added to the initial version of the bill we drafted last year. First, the bill would create an expedited foreclosure process for properties that are confirmed to be vacant. That'll speed up the time it takes for a bank to actually take ownership and to be able to put a property back on the market. Second, any penalties collected as a result of enforcement actions brought by my office for banks that don't maintain or list properties on the zombie registry will be directed to a fund for local governments to hire additional code enforcement officers for the municipalities where the violations occur. Ladies and gentlemen, this legislation is a no-brainer. It's supported by mayors, by county executives, by senators, assembly members, local legislatures, county boards, and law enforcement agencies all across the state of New York. Zombies put a burden on local government not just to maintain, but also to police. They are a serious problem to public safety. They are a haven for firebugs, and it's something that really is a burden and an unnecessary burden on communities like Syracuse. We're looking to fix that by passing the Abandoned Property Neighborhood Relief Act this legislative session. So we seek now to pass this bill to put an end to the burdens placed on our law enforcement officers and other first responders. Let's put an end to the burden placed on our cities and towns by having to maintain these dilapidated properties. Let's put an end to the burden on taxpayers who have to pay extra because these properties remain abandoned for so long. And let's do it this year. I'm very pleased with the fact that we get to do this announcement here in Syracuse, which has just been, as I said, a tremendous success story as it's worked with our HOP network and worked to have a tremendously successful land bank. And I'm proud to now introduce really the quarterback of that effort, Mayor Stephanie Meyer.
Thank you. I want to thank the Attorney General for his continued support and partnership in all of the issues that we deal with here in the city of Syracuse, but particularly the issue of revitalizing our housing stock. Without the efforts of his office to address the underlying causes of the housing crisis and the financial crisis, we wouldn't have been able to access some of the resources, and being able to get those resources that his office made available to help us partner with the land bank to really begin to address in a systematic way for the people of the city of Syracuse the issue of having abandoned properties in our neighborhood. And as the Attorney General said, when we started unpacking these issues, we saw that we had a real problem with zombie properties. We stand in front of a zombie property and you can look to the left and look to the right and see that you have people living in houses who are taking care of their properties, and yet they are forced to live every single day next to these properties which have been abandoned by the banks which have responsibilities for them. As the administration for the city, we have contacted banks over and over again asking them to let us put people in those homes. Not just here, but across the city. And over again, they have said no. And what happens is a continual deterioration of the neighborhood. Families who want to move into these houses and take care of these properties are not allowed to. Our neighborhoods suffer and our taxpayers suffer. And I want to thank the Attorney General for recognizing this issue to help us solve this problem. Because unless there is a systematic solution where banks are held accountable, unfortunately we cannot get to these properties in time to help revitalize our neighborhoods. So I want to thank the Attorney General for once again bringing this issue to the fore. Thank him for his partnership with us on the land bank and on zombie properties. And also I want to thank our partners from the Assembly and Senate who are here to join in support of this incredibly important issue to what is the foundation of any great city, which is our neighborhoods and our housing stock. So with that, let me turn the mic over to Senator Valesky.
All right, Mayor. Mayor Minor, thank you. Appreciate the chance to be here with my partners in government. This is, as the Attorney General and the Mayor have indicated, a critically important issue, and it really, in very many ways, is the next step, the follow-up to the land bank legislation that I had an opportunity to author in the Senate just a couple of years ago, and that has been a tremendous success. This is now, as the Attorney General has indicated, a legislative issue. But the reality is, the way Albany works, the Attorney General has an opportunity to introduce program bills in the legislature. This is an Attorney General program bill. Let me make that very clear. The Abandoned Property Neighborhood Relief Act has been drafted by the Attorney General and his staff. He has done a tremendous amount of work in both the Senate and the Assembly to bring it to us, because the next step is we have to make that change in statute. And I know that my legislative colleagues here, Assemblyman Roberts and Sturpey, understand how important this is and are anxious to bring this to a successful conclusion. In the Senate, I'm pleased that the leader of my conference, the Independent Democratic Conference, Senator Jeff Klein, is the lead sponsor of the bill in the Senate. And the reality is, as you all know, we recently completed the New York State budget process, but we return to Albany next week for the 2.5-month remainder, non-budget session remainder of the legislative process this year. And there are many issues, and you've talked about and written about many of them, that have expiration dates in June, and issues that were considered but that were perhaps not brought to conclusion in the budget process itself. This is an issue. This legislation, in my opinion, deserves to be considered in conversation with all of those other issues out there, as far as issues that needs to be concluded prior to the June finish of the legislative session. So I appreciate the fact that the Attorney General will come to Syracuse and talk about this critically important bill, and look forward to continuing to work with him and my colleagues in the Assembly to make it a legislative reality this session. With that, I call Syracuse Police Chief Frank Fowler forward. These zombie properties, as all of you know, have very real impact in terms of crime in our communities all across the state, and Police Chief Fowler will share his thoughts on that.
All right, Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the Attorney General for his continued support to the Syracuse community and law enforcement and all of his efforts in that regard. Properties like this, indeed, is a burden on public safety. This year, we've responded to multiple calls for school-aged children during school hours trespassing on these properties. Both male and females entering these properties where our police officers have to respond and have them removed. In addition to that, these properties become an attraction for the criminal element. We received calls from our neighbors on the west side of the city about people trespassing on abandoned properties. One of these properties, we arrived, conducted a search inside the house, the abandoned house, and we discovered a fully loaded shotgun and drug paraphernalia. Clearly, the criminal element was using this as a safe haven to sell drugs from and also to arm themselves while they were conducting their criminal activity. Just yesterday, in the 800 block of Butternut Street, one of our officers were on patrol. They happened to notice a person trespassing on one of these types of properties. They got out of their vehicle and engaged the 23-year-old suspect, and they discovered during their encounter with him that not only was he trespassing on the property, but he was in possession of a fully loaded 9mm stolen handgun in his waistband. These types of properties and people trespassing on these properties are responsible for numerous calls for police services. And if we can get these buildings occupied, then our neighborhoods will become a lot safer than what they are now. So I think this is a great legislation here, and I think it's going to help us out tremendously. And to further talk about the public safety aspect of this, I introduce you to Deputy Chief of Fire Stu Caputo.
All right, Chief. Thank you, Chief Howard. I'd like to thank the Attorney General and Mayor Miner for allowing me to be here and for this program. Abandoned buildings that aren't maintained soon become derelict buildings, and derelict buildings soon become attractive nuisances to curious children and nefarious individuals. Those buildings put young people that are less fortunate, and my firefighters at risk, and it's a danger to the community. I appreciate your efforts, Attorney General, Mayor Miner, and thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And once again, in closing, I really do have to repeat that there really is no place in New York State where the public officials and the activists and the professionals in law enforcement put differences aside and pull together more effectively than they do here in Syracuse, here in the greater Syracuse area. You all are a model for the state, and I know that everyone's competing for resources, but I certainly can tell any of my colleagues in government who want to know, when you provide resources here, you make good use of them, you get results, and this has been a great community effort. So with that, Matt will open it up to questions.
You can identify yourself, the media outlet, start on this topic.
Bill Carey from Time Warner Cable News. I'm wondering what the resistance was last year when you first attempted to get this bill through, and how you think you can get by that resistance this year.
Well, we only drafted the bill. As I explained, this has been a process of us coming to understand the nature of the problem and also understand that the zombie problem was getting bigger. At first we thought it was a temporary problem. The number of zombies in New York has actually gone up over the last year. So we introduced it relatively late in the session, and then we started rallying groups around the state. And after the close of last year's session, I've spoken to the Conference of Mayors, Association of Towns, Counties. We have built support all around the state. We've improved the bill with the two new provisions that I mentioned. We have very strong sponsors, Helene Weinstein, the head of the Judiciary Committee in the Assembly, and Senator Jeff Klein, as Senator Valesky pointed out, in the Senate. And I'm very confident that we are going to have overwhelming support from local governments and law enforcement and advocates all across the state. So this is a good place to be in to try and get a bill passed. As you know, the structure of our government in Albany, stopping things is often easier than getting things done, but I'm very, very optimistic because this is just such a crying need with such a clear solution and such a huge upside for communities all over the state.
Anything else on this topic?
Terry Weaver with Syracuse Media Group. So, what should a person do if they think they have a zombie on their block? What can they do? I I mean, who should they call? Can they find out about that property?
Well, I would ask the mayor to speak about this, but the question is, what do you do if you are living on a block and you think there may be a zombie property on your block? This is a big challenge, and this is one of the reasons we included in our bill setting up a registry to make it easy for local governments to determine who actually owns the property. But Mayor, why don't you speak to that thing?
Well, you know, this is something that we deal with every day, and the land bank deals with every day. So the first thing you should do is call the city, call the mayor's office, and we'll find the answer out for you. And then the second thing you should do is you should call your assemblymen, your senators, and tell them that this is an important bill that needs to be passed to help address this issue. So we will work on the property itself here in Syracuse, but we need legislative action in Albany to help us put a system in place that gives us the tools to break this logjam that we have.
On this topic or something else? Okay. Anything else on this? Okay. Other topics?
Attorney General, I'm wondering where you find yourself coming down in this debate issue over opting out of these mandatory tests in the state schools. What do you feel it's too easy to do? What do you feel it should be easy to do? Whether we're over.
I think I don't have anything to add to the debate, really. I represent the state, including the Department of Education, so I don't have a comment about that. It's, you know, we'll see what happens going forward, and we'll see what the real challenges may or may not be brought.
Another question deals with recent polling that's come out showing the governor's favorability has dropped significantly. Wondering I'm wondering whether you find yourself questioning whether the support for the governor will be there in 2018 and whether other candidates may be considering a run for governor in 2018.
We just got through running for re-election. I just ran as a running mate on a ticket with the governor 6 months ago. He's the same guy he was 6 months ago. I think ups and downs in the polls don't affect my thinking about this. I'm looking forward to working together for the next 4 years and for, you know, as long as we both are doing this after that.
Sir, Ryan Delaney from WRVO. You this week sent a cease and desist letter to a property management firm in Watertown. Or if you could just talk a little bit about what exactly that company was doing to these residents. Explain that.
Yeah, this is a serious matter. I do have a regional office in Watertown. We take our work on behalf of the servicemen and women at Fort Drum and the community built around Fort Drum very, very seriously. Service members have rights when it comes to property to move in and out on shorter notice, and those are protected by federal law. We sent a cease and desist letter because this property owner we found, and we have alleged, has been abusing service members by improperly fining them for trying to leave early or imposing fees on them at the front end of a lease. We have taken a lot of actions to protect the servicemen and women in Fort Drum. It's something we take seriously. We work with our active duty service members, and we have found that there are some folks who actually specialize in scamming active duty service members, not just here, but in different places around the country. And it is one of the most despicable things I've encountered since I've been Attorney General. So that's what we're doing in that particular case.
Do you know what the dollar amount of these fines are? What, you know, how nickel and diming they are to these residents?
That's one of the things we're trying to determine now is exactly how many people were victims and what the total was. But even if it's one serviceman or woman, it's unacceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.